Welcome to What CEOs Talk About. Do you wonder what CEOs talk about behind closed doors? How they bring their vision to reality? How do they overcome and succeed through adversity? We share that and so much more with each episode. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, everybody. My name is Martin Hunter. I am the host of What CEOs Talk About. And today we've got Liz Long as our guest. Thank you for being on the show, Liz.
Thanks so much for having me, Martin. I'm really excited to be here.
I am at a WeWork station, so shout out to WeWork. I'm in WeWork, Florida, because I am seeing my partner down here. And so that's why you see me out of the normal studio that we have. First, a word from our sponsors, Urgio. So Urgio is an operational excellence firm. So Liz, have you worked in businesses or know any businesses that have grown?
Yes, absolutely.
What are the key struggles that you feel that kind of businesses, regardless of maturity, kind of struggle with off the top of your head?
Well, as far as growth is concerned, I think there's always a point where the demand is exceeding the resources, and a struggle to meet demand without the funds to take that next step.
Absolutely, right? So that's a good point. So sometimes either the funds, the capability, or the capacity of the organization doesn't necessarily follow. You've got a great sales team, and then operationally, you're kind of struggling. And that's where bringing on Urgio with that operational excellence mindset really helps the organization see, deliver, and improve the value flow to customer. And what we mean by that is we help out in a project base. Urgio helps out in regards to bringing these key resources that will inject, like a SWAT team, to be able to bolster up the operations to be able to deliver the sales that have happened. So great example. Thank you very much. So if you're looking at scaling your business, regardless of industry that you're at, you're ready to grow, you're ready to scale, or you're ready to exit, contact Urgio.com and they will help you out. Fabulous. Thank you. With that being said, Liz Long, you are on the show. Liz, we're going to tell everybody a secret. It's Liz's first ever podcast. So yay for Liz. Thank you very much for being on the show. Liz, what is the title of the show today?
The title of the show today is Victimtown, an unavoidable destination and the gifts it offers.
That is also the title of your book, right? Now, tell us a little bit, before you read the excerpt of your book, tell us a little bit about your story. Where do you come from? Where you been? Where does it, kind of come up to you writing the book and where you are in life today?
Sure. Martin, I'm about to turn 60 years old next month, and I'm at the beginning of my third career.
Oh, wow.
So it's never too late. And I feel finally, that I've landed where I've been meant to be, and what all my life experiences have led me toward. And that is to be a mental health advocate by sharing my story and all of the things that helped me. And I'm doing that through publishing my book.
Okay. So tell me, how did it all start? Where are you from? What was your first career? Kind of bring us to where you are now.
Well, truthfully, it all started in childhood. But when I read the first excerpt from my book, that will probably prompt the discussion from there. Career-wise, I have worked in accounting, and I've been entrepreneurial over the years with several businesses. And my second main career was real estate. Where I ran a team of agents in the residential industry in Southern Ontario.
Okay. And then, so what was the trigger event to say, well, I want to leave real estate and now I want to write a book?
That was the spiraling of my own mental health, which had been building up for, truthfully, 50 plus years. And a few things contributed. COVID was a part of it. A reneged proposal, a disappointing fallout with a business colleague. Space emerged, and everything that had been tamped down and locked up for a long time started bubbling up. The tipping point for me was a routine thing that people do every single day, and that was resetting my Netflix account.
Oh shit! I'm so sorry.
That was the final straw, Martin. I was relying heavily on Netflix and wine, and when I couldn't reset my Netflix account, the suicidal thoughts became an hourly event, and I knew that was trouble. And I checked myself into a treatment center for depression, where I spent 6 weeks. It was the coming out of that and the integration of all I learned there that spawned my writing of the book.
Wow. Netflix. Evil. We're kind of kidding around. It's funny. Well, I shouldn't say funny.
It is. It's funny, not funny. And that's my tone. I'm cool with that.
So I was in Bosnia and we had to bury children. So I had to dig 14 graves that were 4 foot long, and that stayed with me. And one of the things that people tell me all the time is when I was in the military, I always carried a toothbrush with me. No matter where I was, in Borneo, Africa, South America, I always carried a toothbrush with me. So people call me dentist all the time because I felt like when you're in the bush and you're all groggy and all stuff, brushing your teeth is such a wonderful feeling of having clean teeth. And one time, about 10 years after that, I was brushing my teeth and the emotion came back. And that was my trigger event that I just started crying. I cried for 2 weeks straight. I'd see my kids, I'd cry. It was the fact of brushing my teeth. So I want to relate to that trigger event, that whatever it is, it's that one thing that brings that emotional attachment, that brings that back to, yeah, I made fun of Netflix, but I know where it comes from. I definitely know where it comes from. So let's do your reading. Let's hear what you got to say.
Thank you for the opportunity. When I was 6 years old, my favorite aunt and babysitter, Linda White, disappeared at the age of 19. My mother moved into the role of crisis management, and she completely checked out of parenting. We moved into my grandparents' house, and I grew up in Linda's bedroom. We all endured 5 very long years of not knowing if she was even alive. It took a tremendous toll on our family. My grandfather had a stroke, my baby sister was born prematurely and died, and there were several divorces. And today, more than 50 years later, her case remains one of the longest unsolved murders in Canada. This excerpt is from chapter 4, called You Did the Best You Could. Shit happened to all of us when we were kids. And even though we may have lost our way, whatever it was that happened, it really wasn't our fault. It wasn't fair, and we certainly didn't deserve it. No child does. But all the things that happened when we were kids, they caused us to change. It was impossible for them not to. In order to explain to ourselves why or how anything happened, we imagined stories and we made up meanings with whatever sketchy information happened to be available. The way we figured things out and the meanings that we made up, they completely changed how we thought of ourselves and our perspective of the world. They caused us to act in new and different ways. Our revised behaviors, our coping mechanisms, along with our new beliefs about the world, had one purpose: to protect ourselves from further hurt. I have only 7 childhood memories. This story is memory number 3. Not long after my Aunt Linda went missing, a young girl disappeared from the woods right beside my school playground. It happened on the weekend, and she didn't go to my school, but she was the same age as me, and it happened in the same woods that my friends and I played in every day at recess. While my younger brother and I were sitting at the dinner table, my parents were talking with each other about this new development. And then they remembered something. They said that Marianne Schuett still hadn't been found. Who was that? Listening to them, I learned that a year ago, a 10-year-old girl named Marianne got into a car after her school let out, and she was never seen again. Her school was only 9 miles away. I remember sitting at the table thinking, what? It's not just my Aunt Linda and the girl in the woods. Another girl got taken last year too? It may sound hard to believe, but this is all true. My father started walking a group of us neighborhood kids the 3 blocks to school every morning with a pitchfork. It completely boggles my mind that we even own such a thing, and I guess it must have been the only tool in our shed that could be used for protection. The risk of getting snatched, however, had just become even more real. All the kids were scared, but nobody was more afraid than me, because I knew firsthand that it didn't happen to other people. I don't actually remember walking with the pitchfork. That part was told to me by the other kids and also by my dad. What I do remember is being terrified. I was terrified to be alone every single time I left my house. Going to school was a non-negotiable. In my classroom, I started looking around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 36 kids here. That's a lot. If I can just stay really, really small and quiet and not do anything to stand out, if the snatcher shows up here, hopefully he won't see me. It's not that I wanted anyone else to disappear. I really didn't. But that's how the voice in my head worked when I was 6 years old. My refusal to leave the safety of the classroom also meant that I would not even go to the washroom. Not ever. Not even at lunch. Too embarrassed to ask the teacher if a friend could go with me, I was ashamed. I didn't want to tell people why I was such a scaredy cat. And it was a very long day until school let out at 3:45 in the afternoon. One winter day, when the last bell finally rang, I had to go to the bathroom really, really badly. And I don't know why, but nobody was ever around to walk us home. Instead, each of our parents gave us instructions. Whatever you do, stay together. Make sure you come straight home. Don't dilly-dally and don't talk to anyone. Pay attention and keep your wits about you. I debated staying with the group that day like I was supposed to, but my bladder was about to burst. And they all walked so slowly. Anyway, we were just a group of kids. We didn't even have a spoon, let alone a pitchfork. The way I figured it, running by myself as fast as I could the whole way, well, that was my best option. I happened to be wearing a brand new outfit. Dark green polyester pants with a seam right down the center of each leg to the coolest bell-bottom flare ever. My plaid top was a perfect match. I was styling. But the voice in my head was growing concerned about something else. Oh my gosh, I have to go so bad. This is not good. Then a different voice showed up. It'll be okay. Just run your fastest and don't look back. So I took off at lightning speed, holding onto the handle of my school bag for dear life. I raced down the sidewalk. I couldn't help but look over my shoulder every few steps, and after only 2 blocks, I could barely breathe. And as I rounded the last corner, I could see my house. Yay! But it was still more than a block away. Afraid that I was not going to make it, I pretended I was on the track team with a coach on the sidelines yelling at me, "Run faster, Long!" And I did. Somehow I found even more energy and I was able to pick up the pace. But that extra effort expended for that gain in speed, well, let's just say it wasn't the best move. It began to compromise my ability to hold in the pee. It started with a few drips. I could feel each one slowly rolling down the inside of my legs. separately chasing that fateful drop that led the way, and I slowed down to a jog, hoping to get a grip, as they say, to stop the flow. But as any girl knows, once that dam breaks, it is damn hard to stop. The pee continued to roll, quickly becoming an unstoppable stream and gaining in velocity down both legs. Oh, no, I hope it doesn't show. With my shitty luck, it was cold out. Freezing cold. January in Canada cold, Martin. I'm talking bobsled to the grocery store cold. And I wished desperately for the safety and privacy of my house. The faster I ran, the more I peed. Oh, my best school clothes are ruined. Didn't take long for the pee to soak right through the fabric of my green polyester pants. And what followed was like a freakish science experiment. As the warm pee met the frigid winter air, the result was disastrous. Gusts of urine-smelling steam began to rise up all around me. Oh, yuck, what is happening? I felt like Pigpen from Charlie Brown, and I started to cry. You'd think that was bad enough, but the science experiment was about to enter phase 2. My fancy pants with the pleat down the middle, those pants, they began to get brittle, and then they froze solid. I could barely move my legs. Hell was freezing over. My run mutated into this weird, happy-go-lucky, straight legs swinging out the sides kind of movement. Oh, I must look like an idiot, I thought. Why couldn't I live in Florida? As my skin, wet, covered in pee, rubbed and chafed against the frozen fabric, my legs felt like they were on fire, which made no sense at all. I glanced down, no flames, but my legs were burning, and now I had frozen tears on my face. Oh, I can't think about it now. And I don't have to, because I've arrived. I made it. Back in my warm house, I'm melting. My pants are melting. But I'm here, and I didn't get snatched, and I'm grateful. And I still don't feel safe. That day in 1968 changed my life. It was the beginning of a long and complicated expedition, an expedition to reclaim my voice and eventually find my place in the world.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That just shows really how much self-talk is such a key component to mental health, right? We say, oh, mental health is a disease, or mental health is this, or mental health is that. But really, it's the self-talk that I find is always one of the critical components of disastrous events, in my opinion. What do you think about that?
I think self-talk, you're absolutely right, Martin. It's the foundation of where we end up living. And the fictitious place I created called Victimtown has a number of different places, and each of those places has a voice that talks to us. And the places in Victimtown are the Ego Arena, which is the hub of it all, the Guilt and Shame Cafe, where the maitre d' talks to us.
Oh, yeah.
The Denial Walking Trails, the Sorrow Swamplands, the Anger Gas Station, the Control Factory, and Epiphany Hospital.
I like the gas station. Throw more fire and more gas on the fire. Absolutely. It's I think that the one thing that I hear from your story that the fear is more, we fear more than the actual event itself, is that we get ourselves in a position where we're afraid of something that leads us down this path to where it's null and void. It's non-existent. It just lives in our head.
It does, but those voices can be very convincing. And collectively, I call them the town voices. And they speak with a mission to spin us up and entice fear.
Absolutely. There's this great tool that we do, and I'm not going to claim it. It's Tim Ferriss who made it. It's called fear setting, where you take all the fears that you've got and you actually plan them out. So, okay, and basically do a risk matrix. What's the probability of happening and what's the impact that it has? And by having a process to deal with each of them, it's funny how you can silence these voices in your head by saying, oh, well, it's not as big as I expect it to be. Oh, there's an action plan to mitigate that risk. Oh, there's actions that I can avoid that fear by completely doing that. So having a bit of a rational kind of big axe to kind of kill those voices is something that, as a CEO, as a leader, you can implement for your organization. Because I know that I'm sure CEOs live massive fears as much as we think that they're rock solid every day and day in, day out. So what's your suggestion in your book on how you attack those characters?
The first step in any transformation or growth is awareness. And by the descriptions and the naming of the places in Victimtown, people will recognize that's where they're hanging out themselves. And they'll also recognize and find people that they know well, friends, business colleagues, employees, are also hanging out in those places. And you referred to it, Martin, as an axe or something to quench those voices. And I introduce the voice that talks back to those. So you said some of those things the voice says. It's not nearly as bad as you thought. When we talk back to the voice in our head, we become aware that fear inciting shitty voice is not really us because we're talking back to it. And the voice that we're talking back to it from, I call our heart voice. And our heart voice is full of wisdom and knowledge and only acts for our highest and best good. So when we can learn to cultivate the heart voice and then have the courage to act on its wisdom, we can put some of those town voices in their place.
Yeah, that's a great, I think so what do you suggest when somebody is as a CEO, as a leader, what kind of, you've gone through this. So what are some signs and symptoms that you could tell a leader to say, hey, listen, here's the things that you can control. Here's the things that you can do to really gauge if somebody is visiting Victimtown more often than they should, that they are responsible or accountable for.
Yeah, that's it's a really important thing because CEOs today have to be more aware and cognizant of their people's mental health in order for the business to thrive and for everybody to be better and more successful. And one of the things that Victimtown and the Places does is that it destigmatizes and it makes it a conversation starter and easier for people to talk about it. For example, if they said to somebody on a Monday morning, hey, how was your weekend? And what they're thinking in their head was, oh my God, I spent the entire freaking weekend in bed because I hate myself. But they're not going to say that. But they could say, it wasn't that great. I ate 3 solid meals at the Guilt and Shame Cafe. And the CEO could respond with, yeah, that's not a great place to eat. I've been there and the food there sucks, man. And they'll know where they're at without them having to be as vulnerable.
There's at my boys' school, I kind of like how one of the teachers, now this is something that I don't know if is implemented throughout the school system, but she applies it at my boys' school or boys' class. is an emotional state. Are you red? Are you yellow? Are you green? Are you blue? And so it without having to go too much into details, um, you can apply that methodology at work too. Like one of the things that we do in partnerships or in an organization called Entrepreneurs Organization is we use a one word opening, meaning that in a meeting, if I go exhausted, and that's my one word opening, I everybody around the table knows in the meeting, well, Martin's really tired, so maybe not poke the bear, maybe not really go and ask Martin some really detailed mathematical questions, right? If they ask Liz and they go, Liz is excited, then we know that Liz is going to talk a little bit more than she would normally talk. And I'm just making examples, but giving tools to leaders to be able to assess, I think, without, and I think you nailed it in your story as well, is we're so, I hope I'm not disrupting. I don't care about anybody else. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Nobody comes in with bad intentions, but everybody puts up these walls to make sure that, and the best defense is to have a wall in front of them, right? So I think there's an opportunity there to do that, right?
We all have the same mission to protect ourselves from being hurt. And for each of us, however that manifests, whatever it is, I can pretty much guarantee it started in childhood. I had 5 or 6 therapists over the years try to convince me of that. And it's not that I was denying the things I went through as a child. I was fully aware of what happened. I just didn't think that those things had any impact or responsibility for my struggles as an adult until I became living proof.
I absolutely 100% support that. And I think there's documentation. There's like 5 kind of, and again, I think the I don't want to lay blame on the previous generation, because as parents, you do everything that you can for the betterment of your child. Well, most of us do. There's some pretty shitty parents, but I think that, like you said before in your story, there are survival moments where people just can't cope with it, and that's just the way it is. And I think most parents honestly do the best that they can to raise their children in the way that they've been raised. At some, it's your perception as an individual and a child of how you're being treated that has a major impact on it. And I know that, for example, my father was an alcoholic and was not present often. And he wasn't malicious. He wasn't this. It wasn't that. Yes, it was harder to grow up, and we'd get hits across the head, which you don't do anymore, which is a good thing. But I don't think there's never a lot of physical abuse, but I see myself always wanting to make my father proud, and that today, as at the age of 50, it drives me as an individual to say, well, I can do better. I can do better. I can do better. I can do better. To a fault sometimes. To a fault.
Yes, you're not wrong. Every parent, I'm in agreement. We all, and I'm a parent myself now. I have 2 grown boys, and they will attest that I totally messed up and caused them some trauma and shit in their childhood. We do the best we can with the resources we have.
And that goes for CEOs and leaders as well, right? And employees and staff and people don't necessarily show up at work. There's some few morons, but people tend to show up at work with good intentions at heart and looking to do the best that they can. And same thing as a leader. But I think you have to be, in today's age, you have to be intentional. You have to be intentional to be signs and symptoms. For the listeners that are more consistent, you will know that one of my daughter's 13-year-old friend committed suicide on November 5th of 2021. And good parents, good circle, the voices in her head, I'm assuming, pushed her to make a very courageous decision for her to do this. So I have gone out of my way to be intentional in assessing and making time for my staff and my team to say, hey, how are you doing? We've got prices of gas is high. We've got the start of the Ukrainian situation. We've got the pandemic. We've got vaxxers and anti-vaxxers. There's so much disruption in the world right now where there's not a lot of time for silence. I feel that everywhere you turn, there's something else going on. And I think that's not healthy as well. So what are some solutions to that you have lived through that you think are good to silence or talk back to those things? What are some personal tools that people can use for themselves?
Everybody's different, and depending on what your childhood experiences, your coping mechanisms, your struggles as an adult, depending where you're hanging out in Victimtown and what the voices are saying in your head can be unique. The things that worked for me were leaning into my feelings and crying when I needed to cry and getting the anger out and not suppressing whatever it is that's going on. I had a lot that I had to let out that was trapped in there for many years. So not to be keeping the things trapped in there, but letting them out as we live is a really good strategy. It's not what a lot of people want to hear because it's hard and it's shitty to feel the pain and the vulnerability and the rejection and all the other feelings that just really hurt. I'm a big advocate of what I describe as radical self-care. And that again looks a little bit different for everybody. I believe meditation is an excellent tool. Exercise, I mean, the common things that we all know, and yet we struggle to implement as often as we should. Clarity is a big thing. I've been sober now for 15 months since I checked myself into the place. So I think that's a big help. Owning our stories is another one. We all have shameful things. So working through and transforming and owning what we can't change, the things in our past, has helped me move forward.
That is so true. The power of storytelling, of telling it in a story format, I find, and owning that story is key. And I think there's nothing wrong in changing the narrative for your benefit. I think that there's certain things that you're allowed to change the story. Now, the events might not be, the story might not reflect the events. So what they write in movies or are close to a real enactment or something like that based on the true story, right? So when you're telling your personal story, I think it's okay. It's okay to change certain things that bring grief, that bring you back to Victimtown. I think that you should tell your story for the betterment of people understanding you and you being comfortable in your skin. So I don't think that I don't think you should lie, but what I mean by that is that if it doesn't add value to the conversation without lying and it makes you feel better, then do it. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, for sure. The comfortable in your skin, I think, is just the beginning. It's my hope that the readers of my book, that the way will be paved for them to love themselves without limits or conditions.
Yeah, I self-love. We talk about that with my kids often, and then we make fun of it a little bit. I was like, so I feel loving yourself and caring for yourself are not necessarily selfish actions. Now, selfish means that you're centered on yourself, but the way that we view it, we see selfish as a negative thing. But if we change that negative connotation or change the language to self-care, there's nothing wrong with that. and this is something that I've struggled with, is as a parent, as a supervisor, as a leader, I tend to put others in front of me and to my detriment. And I think that if you're healthy physically, mentally, spiritually, then you're a better servant to others. So I think that is a one, you're a role model for others who are potentially struggling, but also you're a lot stronger personally if you go to the gym, you eat well, you stay well, you hydrate, you meditate, you keep learning. I think that makes you a role model, and without having to do much, you can influence others by being a better person.
Yes, absolutely. Self-care is an act of generosity, because the more we fill ourselves up, the more we have to give to the people that we care about, the people that we lead in our companies, and to our families. If we don't have it to give, then it only depletes ourselves, and then we're no good to anybody else.
Agreed. What's at the exception of your book, what other books have you read or that you keep by your side that you go, you know what, this is a piece of reference that I've kept with me for a long time?
There's lots, Martin. In my healing journey, I would have to say one of the most influential people was Melanie Beattie and her work on codependent relationships. Because, and the core message of my book is that our childhood coping mechanisms are not meant to be permanent. I grew up trying to keep the peace and not rock the boat and do whatever it took to not be needy or displeasing or cause any more stress to a situation that was already crisis mode for my family. In other words, I had zero boundaries. And as an adult, that translates into a great potential for codependent relationships. And Melody Beattie has done some tremendous work on healing those and the development of boundaries, the expression of them, the defending of them. I think boundaries is a huge thing for self-worth and happiness.
Good. So what's the next step for you? What are you working on? So now you're in this place in life. You've done some good job. You've got your book out. You're spreading the gospel. What's the one area of improvement that you're working on?
Well, Martin, there's always room for improvement. I mean, I'm writing a self-help book, and I don't have a medical degree. I'm not a psychologist. I'm still self-helping myself. Every time shit happens, it's a new adventure in self-help. My book is actually not out yet. It's going into the publisher for developmental editing at the end of the month, so it won't be published until the beginning of 23. In the meantime, in the developmental stage are workshops around Victimtown and the specific places that will help people. And before we get into that, I just wanted to share that Victimtown isn't all bad. There are times when we need to go there. We go there to process really hard feelings, and to spend a little bit of time there can be a positive, transformative experience for us. It's where we all go to learn the hard life lessons. The problems arise when we get stuck there and we don't know how to get out. So that's where it's an unavoidable destination, and it does offer gifts. It can also be our demise.
Gotcha. Well said. So for me, one area that I've been struggling with is eating. I tend to eat my emotions. So every time, no matter how much I try, I said try, I tend to hate that word. It sets you up for failure. So one thing that I've been struggling with that I'm focusing on in the next future is my eating. because eating for me is such an emotional situation. It's not about enjoying or not enjoying. It's about saying, well, I've earned the right, or because it's a bad day, or because it's this, and it's not alcohol related, but food related in some way, shape, or form. So now that you're earning your spot as a reference in mental health, where are you at? What's the gospel? If there's one piece of advice, what would you provide that? What would you say?
I'm a big advocate of therapy. I think that everybody can benefit from it. It's just a matter of what for and for how long you need to go. And as a coping mechanism of eating your emotions, because that is a coping mechanism, I would invite you to reflect on your childhood and think about when it started and what happened, and maybe work with a therapist or other ways. We can't change our coping mechanisms until we figure out where they started.
That is so true.
Yeah, not an easy process, but you got to go back. You got to go back and figure out. And sometimes it's a benign incident. So you said something earlier. It's not so much what happened to us, because we can put trauma on a spectrum of trivial to tragic, and that's a judgment call. And that's not the most influential factor as to how we end up. What really is important is how we internalized it as a kid. And for some of us, it could be something fairly insignificant, but it had a huge impact on us. And then there's other kids that had terrible tragedies, but they, for whatever reason, were more resilient and didn't end up with problems. So there's no judgment around what it was. It's identifying what it was and healing that. And then I think you'll find...
Well, I think accepting the fact that we're not perfect, right? So accepting the fact that we're not perfect, accepting the fact, right? I was, till the age of 45, I felt like I was indestructible, right? I've been in the military, played rugby for many years. Nothing can stop Martin. Martin's a tank. Martin's nickname is Thanos at work, right? There's nothing that's going to stop me. And then you go, oh, my body's not following up. And then my body's not following up. Well, how did I cope with all these things? And then so being in the position where you kind of realize, I think that mentally is kind of the same way. And again, I'm not saying that the body is letting go and the brain is letting go, but I think recognizing, and like you said, I think if you find the root cause or do a root cause analysis, again, using some business term to apply on your own personality, just like if you are a robot, let's do a reboot and go down as far down and figure out where the problem is. And then wanting to change the problem, I think that's the one thing, is to say, well, are you ready and willing? Do you personally want to change your problems, right? I think that Victimtown gets back to that ego as well. So
absolutely. And nobody's ready to take those steps until they're ready. And that's what it's like in the control factory. As parents, I'll speak for myself, have a tendency to go there sometimes. In the control factory, we can be there in the capacity of employee or as boss. And when we start thinking that we know what's best for someone else, you should do this. This is what you need to do. This will fix your problem. That's a job at the control factory, and that never ends well.
That is so applicable at work. I mean, that kind of almost that you see. I was telling Liz how the conversation kind of comes full circle, but that control is really about, as a leader, how much control do you really have? And it's not about it's about helping people and guide people, right? So when we provide feedback, we provide success feedback or guidance feedback. And I think as a leader, if you can guide people to either not go to Victimtown or to guide them through Victimtown so that they come out at the other end, I think that is the job of any leader, as a parent, as a CEO, as the as a frontline supervisor, it's really about how can you bring empathy, kindness, direction, mentorship to guide people out of, to go around Victimtown, to go through Victimtown, or to kind of not go there at all.
Absolutely. Yes. I think the highest calling of a good CEO is to empower all of their people to be the best versions of themselves. And that can't happen by controlling.
I agree. And I think what you said, there is no way in your life you can't go to Victimtown. There's no way. There's just no way. And so, do you have the right tools? Right? So if I think of the 4 cardinal skills of leadership, which is direction, facilitation, elevation, and celebration, those are applicable to the guiding of Victimtown. You can't go there for them. You can offer the direction of saying, hey, this is how you do it. People go through, here's how you get through it. Facilitate their journey through it. Train them and elevate them. So give them the right tools to be able to deal in that journey through it. And then celebrate them coming out of it. I think there's a huge connection between that. And I love that Victimtown. I think, it puts mental stability, or accepting the mental aspect of us as human beings, and not shuffling it under the rug, I think is critical.
Thank you. Yes, I hope that it will spark some new conversations and destigmatize some of the feelings and terms around mental health. And I also talk about the fact, and you touched on it, Martin, that you can't rescue people from Victimtown. You can't show up there and drag them out. They're only going to leave when they're ready to leave. And when you decide to leave Victimtown, when you've learned the life lesson you were sent there to learn, you're going to have to leave some close people behind if you've been hanging out with people that are there. The resentment parking lot is another place in Victimtown where people gather and they have grudge-telling competitions, and they recount all the betrayals and terrible things that have happened to them in their lives, and they try to one-up each other. Those people are there. They're not happy. Nobody thrives in Victimtown. But when you leave, you're going to have to leave those people behind. And with any healing, transformative human journey, there will be people that fall off and fall out of your life.
That is so true. That is so true. We had the conversation with my daughter about that with a friend at school. It's just different directions. Anyways, Liz, thank you so very much for being on the show. I think it was lovely. We had a little bit of technical issues down the middle, but we sorted it out. So thank you very much for your patience. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Martin, for making this a very enjoyable and easy process. And if your listeners would like to connect, lizlongwrites.com is my website, and I will have workshops in the developmental process. So if there's anything that people are looking for, I'm open to suggestions.
Absolutely. And all of that will be at the bottom of the page. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you, Liz. Thank you. With that said, my name is Martin Hunter, the host of What CEOs Talk About, where we translate strategy into frontline operations. Thank you very much for listening, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to What CEOs Talk About. Make sure to click subscribe to get notified about future episodes, or check us out at www.whatceostalkabout.com.